Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to Tyler's Coffee Talks. I've got an amazing guest today, Wes Barefoot. I think his parents didn't want him wearing shoes or something like that. It's a great last name. I love it.
I know, man. I picked it myself. Thanks.
That's great. So a little background is West is a entrepreneur. He is a self-made man. He believes in hard work and he believes in creating something for yourself and not letting others give it to you. So, West, the most important thing that I see in a business owner is someone that's gonna wake up at 5 in the morning and go to bed at 11 at night, care about what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, create something, have a plan. And I mean, you did something really interesting. You got into franchising work, and you did a very successful job of it. And the most important thing that I see is working your plan, and you will never fail. So give the listeners a little bit insight on franchising, how franchising works, what franchising does. Is it a good value system? Is it good to go off of a same brand that has already been pre-established? So, yeah, take it away.
Yeah, man. Appreciate it. And first of all, thanks for the opportunity to be here, Tyler. Appreciate it. And I'm a big fan of everything you're doing and what you're building. So
Thank you.
keep up the great work. But yeah, so, I was fortunate. I fell backwards into franchising really right out of college. I went to business school. I went and worked for a Fortune 500 company right out of college, did that for a few years, tried the whole corporate thing, realized it
Right.
wasn't what I wanted to do long term. And so fortunately, I fell into franchising, not knowing a thing about franchising, right? I mean, at that time in my mind, if you said the word franchise to me, I just thought fast food restaurants pretty much.
McDonald's.
That's
Mm-hmm.
what, yeah, McDonald's, Burger King, Subway. So, not knowing anything about it, I got into a franchise organization, had nothing to do with food. It was more of a service business. I was working at the franchisor level. So, you can think of franchisor as the parent company, corporate office, however you want to think of it.
Right.
And it just opened my eyes. All of a sudden, I'm surrounded by these very entrepreneurial minded people. And pretty quickly into that experience, because I'm working with the founders of this company, they're starting to sell their business model under their brand to other people across the country that want to start the same business as franchisees. Well, they put me in a franchise sales position. So now I'm talking to people all over the country that are doing due diligence on this particular franchise to see if it's a good investment for them. So not only am I working with the founders of this company, I'm talking to people all over the country that were looking to build a business for themselves
Mm-hmm.
or had already done that and were just looking for the next business that they wanted to get involved in. And so
Yeah.
I feel very fortunate that I got introduced to this way of thinking at an early point in my career. And so pretty quickly into all of this, I realized, hey, I need to own businesses myself. And based on what I'd learned about franchising, I saw that as being a good way to get into it. So, fast forward to today, my wife and I own several franchise businesses. We operate in North and South Carolina as
Yeah.
franchisees with a couple of different brands. It's given us so much, not only financial resources, but just control of our time
Right.
and really control of our livelihood. And so, in addition to that, I have a consulting business where I help other people explore franchising, see if it could be a good fit for them. And if it is, help them identify and investigate franchise businesses that could be a good fit for them.
Good. The one thing that you did is you brought up a really good point, and that is that most people, when you say franchise, think of food service. It's
Yeah.
not that at all. There's franchises of air, hot and cold, AC. I'm blanking at the word right now, but it's
HVAC.
HVAC. Thank you, appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
There's franchises of cars. I mean, dealerships are
Yep.
franchise.
Yep.
So when people think franchise is just a food-based service, it's not, and that's definitely a good takeaway for our listeners is You can get into any franchise. Now, franchise is an interesting thing. So franchise is you have to live and quote unquote work by the rules and regulations of the franchisor.
Yep.
Did that give you any kind of positive and or did it give you a negative because you're like, well, I want to do this because my industry or sorry, my customers care more about this, even though the franchisor said, no, I don't want you to do that because it's specifically against our terms and conditions set forth in the contract. Okay,
Hmm.
great, but I think that this might be a better way of doing things. Or were you like, no, I'm going to go by the book. This is how it's going to be done. I'm not going to change anything. It's a set system. If it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a really good point and a good question and something that is really worth some consideration if you're thinking of getting into a franchise business. So, I mean, first of all, you hit the nail on the head. There are franchise businesses in literally just about any industry you can imagine. I mean,
Yep.
just think about the places that you shop, places you would go, whether that's the gym, yes, restaurants. I mean, the food sector is huge within franchising, but automotive, retail, B2B services.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned HVAC. I mean, home services and home improvement.
Yep.
There's massive franchise opportunities. And the interesting thing about it is there's a wide range of how much capital would be needed to get into a franchise. So a lot of people think, hey, I may not have enough capital to open a McDonald's or something, which is probably a 7-figure plus initial investment.
Yeah.
But some of these other franchise business models are much lower initial investments, very lean, low overhead businesses, and they're still scalable. So, very good points you made there in terms of, yeah, following the book, right? I mean, that's a big part of what you're essentially paying for when you buy into a franchise is you're paying to leverage a business model that's already been proven to work. But
Absolutely.
within that, as we've just talked about, there's a lot of different business models out there. So some franchise business models are going to be much more rigid than others.
Mm-hmm.
The franchises that we own are in the service space, right? So home services, commercial services, what I like to call the dirty, unsexy type of businesses, but there's always a demand for that. And in those franchises, we've had a lot of autonomy as franchise owners to, yes, follow the system because we know it works, but at the same time, put our own style on it, right?
Right.
And take our own approach to the business. We've had a lot of autonomy to try different things and experiment to see, you know, I know the franchisor's always done it this way, but let's try this, and we're in a coastal region. We're coastal North and South Carolina. So,
Mm-hmm.
there's things in our region that are different from, the Pacific Northwest or, the middle of the country. So that's an important consideration for someone looking to get into a franchise is, do you want something where you have a little more autonomy or do you want something that's a little more turnkey, but in that you may not be able to wear that creative hat as much to kind of think outside of the box.
Yeah.
But in my experience, there's options out there for just about anyone. But the caveat to that is there are people that I believe are too entrepreneurial for a franchise. If
Yeah.
you're the person that just wants to build something from scratch and wants to try all different types of things to see what works, then honestly, owning a franchise may not be the best fit for you because at the end of the day, there is a system, there is a contract in place. So you have to follow that. But in many cases, franchising is not as rigid of a structure as many people might believe it to be.
Right. And another uh, misrepresentation of franchises is MLM or multi-level marketing, and those are completely separate. Multi-level marketing runs off of building people underneath you to sell trinkets and gadgets and
Yeah.
foo-foo stuff.
Yeah.
Franchises is no, this is like a set program. This is a set inventory. You don't hire people underneath you to make money for you. You hire people to work for you. So that's definitely a differentiator to MLMs. And seriously, I've had a lot of people tell me, "Oh, is that an MLM, the franchise?" No, it's not. They're completely separate entities. They're completely separate ran. They're completely different. So,
That's a good point. A good differentiator, a good way to kind of say, hey, is this a franchise or MLM. And look, I know people that have made a lot of money, getting involved in some MLM businesses.
Yeah.
Personally, it's not of
Well, you lose
interest to
friends
me.
and you lose your family as fast as possible.
Yeah, no doubt, right? So a franchise business is really, you can build it into a business where you're not constantly hounding your friends and loved ones to buy whatever it is you're selling. But a good way to look at it is, all right, with a good franchise, is there an exit strategy, right? With a good franchise, you should be able to build the business and exit it at some point, right? I don't know that that's always the case with multi-level marketing. And I mean, to get into a legitimate franchise, I mean, look, franchising is like anything in life, right? There's great franchises, there's bad franchises, and there's everything in between. So
Right.
I'm not standing here saying that, look, any company that claims to be a franchise or offers franchises, that makes it a good investment. There's, I don't know, last I saw 4,000 plus franchise opportunities in the US today. In my consulting business, I work with about 200, right? And that's not to say that if it's not one of the 200 I work with, it's not a good franchise. My point is, if I'm in a position where I'm introducing people to franchise companies and saying, hey, based on everything I've learned about you, I think this franchise could be really interesting for you to learn more about. I want to be damn sure that they're legitimate, meaning the franchisor does what they say they're going to do to support their franchisees. And the fact of the matter is, to get into a legitimate franchise, there is a substantial investment on the front end of that. Not usually the case with multi-level marketing. I mean, you can get in usually for a couple $1,000. Franchise fees are usually anywhere from $35,000 to $60,000. And a lot of people say, Wes, why would I want to pay that kind of money up front? And then with a legitimate franchise, you are going to have ongoing fees. It's usually structured as what they call a royalty, which is a percentage of your gross revenue. And look, there are franchises out there where, for the life of me, I can't figure out where the value is in paying that initial franchise fee and paying the ongoing fees. But in a good franchise, it should be a very formulaic equation.
Yes.
And you should very clearly be able to see where the value add is.
Right.
You should be able to see what's the value I'm getting for the franchise fee that I'm paying up front.
And your
Usually
cost
there's
of information, sorry, your cost of materials and the cost of marketing. You have to always account for those outside costs. So the one thing that a franchisee is always going to look for is how much marketing is the franchisor going to put out for them, because technically that's really what they're doing, is they're buying into a marketing pool. Like, for example, McDonald's, like you said, we'll just use McDonald's because everyone knows McDonald's. I'm not a fan of McDonald's, but we'll just use it, right? So McDonald's says, okay, well, we're going to spend $40 million a quarter in marketing, and that's going to be nationwide. And then the franchisee says, oh, because I don't have $40 million to promote my own burger joint, but because you guys already have the money, I'm going to be able to piggyback off you. And so that's another formula that you have to look at as you're looking at investing into a franchise, is how much marketing dollars is the franchise going to give you to get your value, your product and services out there.
Yeah, it's a good example. And look, the franchisees for McDonald's, they fund, the majority of the marketing that McDonald's does, but because there's so many of them, there's extreme buying power, right? I mean, one McDonald's franchisee, their contribution to the all-in marketing budget for McDonald's, not to mention just the brand awareness that they have from decades and decades of being, one of the top food franchises out there, right? So you can open a McDonald's and people are going to come because they know exactly what to expect. They know exactly what they're going to get, whether it's a McDonald's in North Carolina or one in Arizona. But here's the thing. Different franchise companies add value to their franchisees in different ways. And a lot of it depends on what type of business they're in. For example, the franchise companies that we own, they're not spending $40 million a year in marketing, but they're the type of businesses where brand recognition is not nearly as important as it would be if we were in the food business, right? Where we get so much of our value from our franchisor is in the buying power for the materials that we're selling, right? I mean, just a quick example to show what I mean when I say it's formulaic. So in one of our franchises, we pay 7% of our gross revenue back to the franchisor. Okay. Which is not a small amount, right? I mean, this is a 7-figure plus business that we're talking about. So 7% is no small chunk of change in that scenario. However, because we are franchisees with this brand, our cost of goods, we sell custom shelving and custom closets. We
Yeah.
buy directly from the franchisor that owns the manufacturing facility. Our cost of goods are at least 15% less, if not closer to 20% less than what they would be if we were in this business on our own, not part of this franchise.
Right.
So I'm coming out net 15% better, even after my 7% comes off the top. And that's not even talking about the marketing, the branding, the technology,
Mm-hmm.
the systems and processes, as well as the learning that we got and the training that we got initially. I mean, we
Right.
were able to come out of the gates running with that business because number one, all the basic stuff was in place, right? We didn't have to come up with our own brand. We didn't have to come up with a website, a CRM. We didn't have to figure out supply chain. All of that was turnkey.
Yeah.
So we open our doors and we're just ready to start selling, right? Whereas if we would have started that business from scratch, and we've done it in a very similar industry, you're talking 6 to 9 months at least of just the basic blocking and tackling to be ready to start operating the business. So
Right. Right.
different franchises are going to add value in different ways. It's just a matter of understanding, all right, what am I getting in exchange for the fees I pay up front, as well as the ongoing fees? And unfortunately, in my opinion, too many franchisors are light on the value add long term, right? They have the initial business model, they have the initial training and support figured out. So there's good value there for a new franchisee. But regardless of the business, at some point, a franchisee gets to where they don't need the franchisor to teach them the business anymore. They don't need the franchisor to train them, but they're still paying these fees. And I know a lot of franchise owners that are pretty bitter when it comes time to make those royalty payments because they don't feel like they're getting enough value long term. So that's a key consideration too. There's a lot to understand about not only what type of franchise business might be a good fit for me, but how to go about doing the due diligence the right way to make sure you're making a sound investment. And that's what I do in my consulting business, Path to Freedom, is I help people navigate that whole process because that's pretty overwhelming, especially for someone that doesn't have experience looking at these types of things already.
Oh, I agree 100%. And the most important thing that you really need to have a takeaway from is that are you going to get the correct training to take, the best way I can explain it is, someone can buy a Lego set, right? And if you don't have the instructions to build that Lego set, you just have a bunch of plastic bricks. You're not going to know how to build the product that you bought. So when you buy a product, you have to get the training manual, and that training manual is extremely, extremely valuable. That's really what you're buying as a franchise, because they're saying, hey, we did all this, we went through all the pitfalls, we did all of the problems, we pretty much created all the problems that you're going to find out, and we already went through those, so you don't have to go through those pitfalls. All you have to do is follow our process and our procedures, and you'll be successful, because if we could do it, you could do it.
Yeah.
And that's what's super valuable to a franchisee, is that ongoing training. And I mean, sometimes the training costs money, sometimes it doesn't cost money, but the value that the franchisee gets is the training behind the franchisor. And it's a lot of money to fail. It costs a lot of money to fail.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, the training, that's a great example of, understanding that value exchange in the short term. And the way I like to explain it to people is, look, think of that, because you said, the training does cost money. I mean, it's not free for the franchisor to train a new franchisee. There's resources that go into that. It's usually baked into that initial franchise fee that you pay. So there's not usually a separate training fee. Sometimes there is, but think of it this way. You're part of what you're getting when you pay that initial franchise fee is you're paying to avoid the mistakes that the franchisor and the franchisees before you have already made. Because a lot of it depends too on what franchise you're getting involved in. Our first franchise that we owned was a pretty mature organization when we got involved. They'd been franchising for something like 12 years when we bought in.
Yeah.
They'd figured most of this stuff out. There wasn't a whole lot of tweaking that needed to be done.
Right.
Whereas our second franchise was more of an emerging concept where there wasn't as much of a track record that. And we knew that going in, and that was appealing to us for a number of reasons. But we also knew there's going to be a little more trial and error even for us as franchisees because the franchisor just hasn't figured it all out yet. And in my opinion, you want a franchisor that's always pushing the envelope, that's always trying new things, that's always evolving to make sure they don't get stagnant, right? Because that's how the competition can catch up to you and your business can become irrelevant. So as a franchisee, we really enjoy being able to contribute to that. And that's where the really good franchise systems, they actually do encourage their franchisees to try new things and then report back. Hey, if you figured something out that works really well, let us know, and maybe we roll it out to the rest of the system.
Right.
Jimmy John's, real quick story. This is take 10 seconds. Jimmy John's is known for what? Freaky fast delivery, right?
Yeah.
It was a franchisee that figured that out. It was a franchisee that first said, hey, we should start delivering. And I may be getting the story a little bit wrong, but like Jimmy John's has like a 1 mile radius that they deliver in, which is why they're so freaky fast.
Right.
So it was a franchisee that figured that out. And the other franchisees were pissed when Jimmy John's came back and said, hey, we're consolidating our delivery radius to 1 mile. But Jimmy John's is an organization, including the franchisees at a unit level, their businesses grew like crazy after they did. And so they look back on it and that was a no-brainer, but the whole thing came from a franchisee that was innovating and trying new things.
No, that's really exciting. The other thing that, and again, I don't know much about franchise law. I don't know how it runs. So maybe you can put a little bit of light on this, but if I am a franchisee and I buy into a franchise, do I start owning equity in that corporation?
Not typically.
Okay.
No, but you own your franchise business, right? So that
Right.
is an entity that you have the ability to exit, to sell at some point in time.
Yeah.
Yeah, you typically don't get equity in the entire franchise organization unless you're like very early on as a franchisee. Like if you're willing to take the risk to be like franchisee number one,
Right.
then you might be able to negotiate, that into the deal.
Right.
But you mentioned franchise law, and this is another big distinguishment between like a franchise and say like MLM or something like
Right.
that. Franchising is regulated by the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission.
Absolutely.
And that's a good thing, especially for the people on the buying side looking to invest in a franchise business. It's heavily regulated. Every franchisor has to have a
accredited.
document. Well, yeah, basically it's like similar to an accredit. There's a document called a franchise disclosure document, an FDD is what you'll hear it referred to, and they have to renew that yearly, right? And in that document, it's got everything that a potential investor would need to know for the most part, including a very detailed breakdown of what the initial investment should look like. And that includes more than just the franchise fee. That includes costs to get your doors open. That includes operating capital that the franchisor wants to see a new franchisee have on hand as they go operational. There's financial performance information, right? So they actually give you data as to how other franchisees are performing financially. The franchisor can't guarantee that you'll make a certain amount of money as a franchisee because they can't control that, right? Because at the end of the day, the franchisee is the biggest variable that determines how successful a franchise is or isn't. But they can give you data from the rest of their franchisees to help you understand what the potential is.
Okay.
And then in the due diligence process, any good franchisor is not only going to encourage you, but actually require you to speak with other franchisees that are already operating. And that's where the real learning happens, right? That's where you get to really understand, what is this business all about? What does it look like on a daily basis? What are the keys to being successful? Because look, a franchise organization is no different from any other company, any sports team, any organization you could think of. There's a bell curve. You've got
Sure.
top performers, underperformers, and everything in between. And so the key is to figure out, what are the top performers doing better than everyone else? What are the underperformers not doing that makes them underperformers?
Yeah.
And then you got to look in the mirror and say, all right, am I more likely to operate like the top performers I talk to, or the underperformers? But a franchisee can share any information about their business that they want to share with you. They can tell you how long it took them to break even on their investment, what their profit margins are, how much they paid themselves, how
Yeah.
they paid themselves,
Yeah.
all these questions that a potential investor would have, you can learn from the franchisees. And so I can't think of another investment opportunity where you get to do as much due diligence and get as much insight into what the opportunity really looks like as you do with a franchise.
Mhm.
There's still a risk involved, don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, if you do the due diligence the right way, you should be able to get 85 to 90% there that this is a good fit for you. The rest of it's just being willing to bet on yourself and
So,
invest in yourself.
so that's the other interesting story that I have about franchise, because I don't really know franchise that well, and I appreciate you telling our listeners what franchising really is all about, because it's very in depth, but at the same time it's a lot easier than starting your own entrepreneurial business, right?
Can be. It can be.
Yeah. But I do know this, and this was a very interesting article that I read, and obviously it's because I'm in the coffee industry that I was kind of interested by it. So Howard Schultz, CEO of Starbucks, he put in the contract that he could buy back the franchise. He had first right of refusal, and he could buy it at this price. And the
Yeah.
franchisees knew that. And they said, okay, fine, we'll let you have that, but in return, we get to make coffee and make money. And Schultz said, sure, no problem, whatever. So then when he went public, he had enough money to buy back all his franchises, and now they're like 95 to 98% owned corporately. So that was an interesting thing. Completely legal, completely above board, but first right of refusal. And so in the contract that you're reading, if you see the first right of refusal clause, it's not a negative thing. It's just something to be aware of.
It's a good point. Yeah, for sure. You want to fully understand and be comfortable with what's in the franchise agreement. And the document that I mentioned earlier, the franchise disclosure document, always has a sample of the then current franchise agreement in it. So there's no reason that someone looking to invest in a franchise shouldn't have the opportunity to fully read the franchise agreement. And look, if you don't understand, some of what's in there, there are attorneys out there that can review it for you. I always recommend having an actual franchise attorney read it. Like
Oh,
your divorce
absolutely.
attorney
Yeah.
probably isn't going to have a whole lot of insight into, what's standard in a franchise agreement and
Right.
what's not. But yeah, I mean, it's a good point. You certainly want to understand what's in there. I would say the first right of refusal for the franchisor to buy you back is, I think it used to be more common than it is today. I don't see it that often where the franchisor has that first right of refusal. And the ones I've seen where they do, there's not like a set price that you're agreeing to, because obviously the goal of building a business is, if and when you're ready to exit, you want to be able to exit for as high of a valuation as possible. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think it's. I think. I don't know. I have to say that the only reason why I say I don't know is because I've done it the complete opposite, where I created my own brand, I created my own idea, I created my own product. I have it all. But I will also say it's a very, very rare breed of person that's willing to take that much segregation and that much abuse, and still come out on top. I mean, they're
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. I mean, you've built what you've built from the ground up, and deserve all the respect in the world for that. And so you can fully appreciate not only how much work goes into it, but how much time it takes, to really get a business built up to the point where you're getting a very strong return, not
Yeah.
only on the investment of your dollars, but also on the investment of your time. And so, I say it all the time, owning a franchise is certainly not right for everyone. There's people out there that have no interest in owning a business, probably have no business owning a business, and that's
Right.
fine. There's people that are so entrepreneurial minded that a franchise would probably be too confining for them,
Yeah.
and that's fine.
Yeah.
But there's this huge segment of people out there that I believe owning a franchise could be a great fit for. Many of them don't understand enough about franchising to realize that, though.
Mm.
I work with people all the time that have built their own successful businesses, and they look at owning a franchise as a way to diversify. They look at it as a way to expand their portfolio,
Sure.
just like you might
Sure.
go and invest in real estate or whatever.
Yep.
They've spent 10, 15, 20 years building a business from scratch. Now they're like, hey, I want to do something where I can see positive cash flow in 6 to 12 months, or whatever the case is. They're like, I'm ready for something that I can build a little bit quicker because that model's already there. So I've really come to look at owning franchises as a way to run faster. What
And
we've done and the franchises that we've owned, the type of revenue that we're bringing in, the type of personal income, the valuation that we could get if we wanted to sell our franchises. We've done all this in under 5 years. If we would have started our own deal from scratch,
oh, it's
I have
much
no doubt.
difficult. Much more
Yeah,
difficult.
no doubt we'd be successful, but it would have taken much longer.
Yeah.
But with all of that, I don't want to create the illusion that franchising is just like this easy button.
No.
It's like work smart instead of hard,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
You can avoid a lot of the mistakes
Yep.
if you listen and learn from the franchisor, but you still have to put in the work. And I
Yeah.
talk to people a lot of time that they're like, hey, how's this franchise going to make me money? Well, you're going to make yourself money if you're smart enough to leverage the system and the resources that the
Exactly.
franchisor has in place. But you
Exactly.
better believe the franchisor is not going to fly in and do it for you.
No.
If they were going to do that, they wouldn't have franchised. They just have corporate owned
Yep.
locations all over the place.
Yeah. So we are going to have to close up the show here. I do appreciate all the information that you've given our listeners. I really appreciate the insight. Really, it's
Yeah.
I've learned a lot. So thank you so much for that. One last thing, I ask all my interviewers that come on the show a lasting question, and that is, what is the worst business decision you've ever made?
Oh man, there's been a few of them.
The worst.
I don't know, man. I mean, to kind of go with the theme of what I talk to so many people about, I think the worst business decision I've ever made was, trying to climb the corporate ladder, even when I knew I didn't want to do it, just because I was chasing the money. Best
Got it.
business decision I ever made was to invest in myself.
Yeah. That was my
And
next
take
question.
things. Okay. All right. So yeah, I mean, I think, again, business ownership's not for everyone, right?
Right.
But if you are in that, what I call the aspiring entrepreneur category, you feel this drive to get into business for yourself, and maybe you have a brilliant idea, like acid-free coffee, and you want to go build your own thing, or maybe you don't know what you want to do, you just know you want more control.
Right.
It's scary as hell, right? It's scary to take that leap. I have a tagline on my podcast. I call it dropping in.
Yeah.
It's scary to drop in, right? But
Sure.
you got to be willing to invest in yourself if you feel that drive. And that may sound a little bit cliche, but so worst business decision was not investing in myself, even though I felt called to do so. Best decision was when I finally mustered up the courage to do it.
Got it. Love it. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Wes Barefoot. I'll never forget that last name. That's a great last name. I love it.
It's good unless you leave a bad impression, because it is the type of name that people don't forget. So
Yeah, but you're that kind of guy. You don't leave a bad impression. Thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you so much for everyone listening. And stay tuned for amazing, amazing content coming out shortly. Wes, always a pleasure. Have a wonderful day.
thanks, Tyler. Appreciate you having me, man.